Welcome, everyone. For those who are here, I would imagine, as you can see from the screen I've shared, you're here for the Compassionate Conversations workshop, where we're going to talk about how to respond with sensitivity when listening to individuals disclose stories, or maybe not even specific stories, but of violence and abuse within the beauty industry, within your profession. So today, and in our workshop, you'll probably recognize this, that we're going to talk about what our current practices are, and also for you guys to think about, what do you currently do? Because, one of the things I would really encourage you right now to consider is that this is not all new knowledge. Now, in the little while, I'm going to ask you to do a couple of exercises to help you to recognize and see within yourself how you've been having those conversations or how you work. So today we'll reflect on that, along with me offering some ideas on how to be a little more trauma sensitive, along with for you guys to think about, how does this fit in with your profession and within the boundaries of who you are. I also want to talk to you guys about self-care while you're in this workshop, or at home or at work, because, well, you guys may not be aware of this yet, but you're going to hear me say this a few times. But when we talked about being compassionate or trauma sensitive, and you're going to hear me say these words a few times, a lot of it comes back to us, to me, making sure that we take care of ourselves. Because, even here, some of this stuff might, and I'll use the word trigger. That means when something in the environment happens and it brings up feelings. That's not unusual. Most of us experience that at some point. What's important is what you do with it. And this is also part of me as a provider, as a healthcare worker, as a beauty person, or working anywhere, is taking care of ourselves so we can do our job. So I put here, and in the top here, or the side, depending on where it's showing up on your screen, are some numbers for you, just for you to remember. And they can be for you now or later, or even when you're working with folks, is that you can call 811 for medical support. 211 will actually give you resources in the community. There's a website for all that is intimate partner violence in the world. And for anyone, there's a mental health, there's a crisis line for anyone. So just, there are resources. Also, I want to give you this, and I give this to all my students anytime I do any of this workshop, is to remind people that if you find yourself, and you might even use this with anyone in your world, and when you're finding that they're not quite there and that they've been triggered, is that a grounding exercise. 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, 3 things you hear, 2 you smell, 1 you taste. That's just a grounding strategy. And it's not just about this workshop. You can find that can work for you whenever you need it. So self-care. And in fact, colleagues, self-care is actually at the root of all of this, because you need to feel comfortable more with yourself as you do this work. And that's true for all of us. Okay. So what I want to do is invite you to consider all of that. I suspect that when you're at your best, you actually are trauma sensitive. You actually are uh, aware of how to be compassionate in your listening. But perhaps one of it, like I said, is to push a little further. And by that I mean is understanding that compassionate listening people um, is about how we hear. It's our communication. It's not necessarily only our words, it's our actions. It's how we stand with someone else and how we're listening to them. Compassionate listening is having a trauma sensitive conversation. It's about how we communicate with other people. It's about having those conversations with understanding this. And I'm going to lean in here and say this. This is not about doing counseling. And I put it this way because my years of teaching around this, and I said, I've given like dozens of workshops in different areas. Everyone seems to think you need advanced training to do this, to have this type of approach of listening compassionate, having a sensitivity around trauma, when in fact, no, you don't need advanced training. What you need is advanced sensitivity and compassion. All right. It's about giving yourself permission to listen to what's being said to you without requiring anyone to disclose to you. Because it's really nothing more intimate than going to someone in the beauty industry and having your hair done, your nails done, um, your skin, everything that you do, that's probably one of the most intimate acts that a person invites you to do. And you're creating safety. So you know how to do that in many ways. So it's about creating safety, promoting choice, and building skills. And by that I mean is that you don't have to fix anything. And it's up to the person that you're talking with who will decide what to do. You don't have to take any actions. All right. And I'll explain that in a moment. All right. So, compassionate listening, again, is about having trauma sensitivity. It's about, and I've written it here, I love this statement. Compassionate listening is when we access our deepest wisdom to transform separation and conflict into opportunities of connection, healing, and peace. What that really means is this: I'm sitting with a person and I'm helping them get what they need and where they want to be. As one of my colleagues who is on here listening, and I heard her say it, and I've heard her say this more than once, is that one of the things about working in the beauty industry is that you create opportunities for the folks who come to see you to be able to see their internal beauty by seeing how they take care of themselves. You help people all of the time become more in touch with themselves. That's why people come to see you. Really, from my perspective, a trauma informed approach, a trauma sensitive, compassionate listening is listening to the person and helping them access who they are. Now, having said that, when we start talking about when people are bringing in perhaps stories or evidence, because reality is very few people actually disclose um, these stories with us. We do it, we see it by what we see. But for us in our communication, these are the things that I offer you. You're not required to fix anything. It's like when we were having our discussions as a group, one of the things that came out in it with the amazing consultants we had was people are actually getting permission to know that if you think something's happening, you don't necessarily have to fix it. One of the things for you guys to be aware of is that there's no mandatory reporting around this. You don't have to call and report someone to the police or call anyone, unless, of course, you're dealing with a minor child or an adult in need of protection. And if that's the case, that's a different thing. And a child in this province is someone under the age of 16. What is required of us, and I've got it written here, is we need a great deal of patience. You know, when I talked about earlier about self care, well, sometimes that's a big piece of this so that we can offer an empathic, caring, compassionate air with boundaries because of this, folks. You will only do what you feel that you need to do. It's not like you're compelled to take action. Perhaps you might remind yourself that sometimes the most sensitive, trauma sensitive, compassionate conversation you can have is by doing the work with a person that is sitting in front of you. By creating that relationship, you're allowing that person and providing that opportunity for that person to see the positive within themselves. Most people have experienced something. And I'm not saying that to trigger anyone in the group here, but I'm sure many of us, you understand that this is the case. Now, it comes out differently in every area, but it's not that we have to take action. Just know that why people respond sometimes in front of us a certain way, because stuff happens and they have responses. So it's not about something I've done. Okay. Or with trauma where it's safety and trustworthiness, I'm creating safety. And I think you're doing it by your jobs or choice and control and collaboration. You're offering choices to the person. So if a person, and we know that something's happened, but they don't want to take action, it's not for us to force them. Perhaps the biggest thing we can do is person comes to us in your world is that the choice is what they're going to do and the control is over what they want to do. And I'm not going to force you, but I'm going to be here to provide the services I've been doing all along. And of course, with the skills, we use positive languaging around the people that we're privileged to support and the privileged people who come to see us. Okay. So one of the things with trauma awareness I want to talk about for a moment is what does it look like when you have people who are coming to you in the beauty industry? What does sometimes domestic violence and abuse look like? What you're going to see is things like when you put a cape on your client. I know when I get my hair done, they put a cape around me, and then sometimes you might notice bruising around the neck here. So another one here is I want my lashes done, but I don't want to look like they're done because my partner doesn't doesn't know, and stuff like that, and how you respond again, you know, even like maybe asking them, what's that like for you? Only, of course, ask the questions if you feel comfortable, because the other piece of compassionate listening and sensitivity is to be not only sensitive to the person who you're privileged to support, but to yourself. You have to manage yourself, what you feel comfortable doing. And as long as you're calm, then you're providing a message to the person, but you don't have to ask anything. Other things here, and I mentioned this, I think, is that sometimes people don't necessarily tell us, but they become uh, withdrawn or quiet. And colleagues, many of you folks are amazing at what you do, which means people come back. So frequently, when people do disclose, it's will be the people who you have been coming to back to see you because you're phenomenal practitioners, right? They're regular people who come out and they might tell you, or they're regular people and there's been enough evidence and you have a relationship. It's like you've become you become friends. Maybe not friends that you're at home having pizza with, but people come in and they come every week, every 2 weeks for 10 years. You guys are important.
And we've also had another comment more about oversharing. Folks who will overshare on a first time visit. For example, we'll talk about abuse, mental health issues,
Right.
etc., especially without an existing relationship.
Mhm.
And sometimes that will happen suddenly and out of the blue.
And how about for you? And I'll go back to this. You don't have to fix it. How about just saying, "My, that must be rough." Because
Mm.
in all of our professions, and I mean even me who's done therapy with people at some point, people overshare. And if you're interested, it doesn't mean that something's happening right now. That's a typical trauma response of people who've experienced trauma in their past too. Just so you know. Right. And for you, you're providing a space and you don't necessarily have to hear all those details, but just say that must be difficult. And, you don't necessarily want to tell a person you don't want to hear it, but it must be difficult.
There's great support in the comments for what you said a few minutes ago, Dale, about it's not just what you say, but sometimes it's how you say it.
Listen, I come back to what my colleague said to me, that in the beauty world, you create an environment for people to feel good about themselves. Each of you who is listening to me here know that that's what you do. That is what a trauma sensitive, compassionate approach is. And again, you don't you are not required to take action except to create that space for someone to figure out for themselves who they are without even necessarily having to do it directly. You're all good at taking care of other people. How good are you at taking care of yourself? That if you invite yourself to think about other self-care for yourself, you're going to find it easier to deal with the folks and become less triggered, because that's how it works. All right. Also, to invite yourself to know that you're human, because you hear stories and the stuff that I put in, it's difficult to listen to it. So managing yourself and figure out what you need to do. In the summary, I I've suggested here is that most people won't come out and tell you that this is happening to them. And even you have to remember that even if you think it's happening, it doesn't mean it does. Or as I say to my students, on average, this is what happens and we see, but no one person is an average person. We can see signs and symptoms and they mean many things. And just remember that. Remembering you're not required to ask questions or get disclosures, that part of this is to strengthen your connection by how you respond and by listening. And how we do that is, well, what I often talk about is presence. Now, you guys do this a lot where you bring yourself and your being to where you are and have that relationship, you know. And this is not something you have to fix. Okay. Some of it here is some of the stuff you can say that must be difficult. Is there anything I can do to help you? I have some resources and numbers if you want them. It's your choice, that type of stuff. All right. So again, no mandatory reporting. Be aware of your community resources. If you don't know what they are, 211 will get you there. Or, I know that when we put information on the website, some of that will be there at this point. All right. So, having said that, I want to thank everyone who showed up here today because you came with a willingness to want to learn new things. And this is how we work together.